Well, hello, Stacey Murphy here with a quick video on safely storing your harvest. So when you're harvesting your vegetables, I want you to have three things that you're thinking about. The first is that you want to prevent any contaminants from entering the food that you're about to eat. And it's super easy. I'll show you how. And then the second thing is that you want to make sure you're keeping your harvest really fresh so that it's super nutritious and also very delicious. And the third is that that means that you're going to maximize your meals. You're going to make sure that everything that you harvest is getting onto your dinner table so you're not wasting any of the precious food. So really quick, some food safety guidelines in the garden. And like I said, it's very challenging to actually contaminate your own garden food, but there are a couple things that you can do to make that happen, and we want to avoid that. So let's go through those really quick. So contaminants from your gardening practices are possible. So you want to know your materials. If you're creating your own compost, you want to make sure it's totally finished decomposing because there's bacteria present in that decomposition process, and that can actually introduce some things into your food that you don't want to be eating. Secondly, make sure that your water, your local water, is safe to drink and free from contaminants, and then you know you can wash your harvest with that. Okay, so the next thing seems very like I shouldn't have to say it, but I have to say it. Wash your hands, because you don't want to go to the bathroom and then go out and harvest your food. And with that said, that goes for your kids as well. So if children are helping you, make sure they wash their hands before they help with the harvest. And finally, keep your harvested food up off the floor. And I know I shouldn't have to say that, but basically what that means is you harvest a basket of food and then you bring it inside and you set it on the floor right where you walk. And that's not a great idea because shoes can contain a lot of contaminants. So you want to make sure that when you harvest anything, take that basket, put it up on a table. And the third way that you can contaminate things is basically by not keeping your harvest tools clean or having something cross-contaminate. And so one thing I would be aware of is if you use chemical sanitation supplies, make sure that your harvest equipment is clean from all of that before you harvest your food. You wouldn't want those chemicals on your food. And then the other thing about cross-contamination is, let's say you use your scissors inside to cut up a raw chicken. Make sure you clean that really well before you take those outside and harvest fresh produce with them. So that's all about how to keep contaminants out of your food. The next step is to keep everything fresh as long as possible so that you can make sure you're maximizing your meals, getting all that precious food onto your table. So when you harvest, the thing you want to remember, it's your job to remove field heat. That's what it's called. Plants, they store the energy of the sun and they warm up. And what you want to do is cool that down, and that's what's going to help your food stay really fresh. So cold water and or a cold space right away will help to remove that field heat. And while I'm talking about it, you want to harvest, if possible, at the coolest time of the day. And that goes for if you're saving your harvest for a later time. If you're just going outside and harvesting for breakfast or for lunch or for dinner and you're harvesting a little bit of food, harvest it whenever you cook it and it's already going to stay fresh. But if you are harvesting and then saving it for later, you want to harvest at the coolest time of the day. And you can soak water in cool baths as well to start to cool them down. So one option is to harvest weekly. Get in all the produce from the week and start to cool it down using this jar method of cooling things down is one way. And if you harvest everything all at once, this inspires you to cook because you can put this on your kitchen table. I would recommend getting it out of the sun, putting it somewhere on a table where there's no sunshine directly on it so it doesn't warm up again. And this will inspire you to cook. And so this is what I like to do so that my housemates will basically take what they want because they're not going to go outside and harvest. So this is what I like to do. And then the other option is that you can harvest for each meal. So you can just get it fresh, treat your garden like your storage spot, and just go out and harvest whatever you need whenever you need it. What I would recommend if you're doing that is you must be cooking daily because there's going to be produce coming in all the time. And if you're not continuously harvesting, then you're not taking full advantage of that garden. So know which style is going to work for you. So let's talk about storing the different types of crops. So first up is what I call stem greens. These are things that have stiff stems and you can usually cook them. So these are things like kale, collards, chard, celery, and then any of your greens from your roots. So you can make these harvest bouquets for the table, and they last For me, they last a week, and basically here you see from left to right, kale, celery, mustard, I'm sorry, turnip greens from my turnips, and then chard. And so you can put your greens from your roots into a jar like this. What I will say is you have to do the rule of 3 cleans. So the first is clean cuts, and you want to make sure that the bottom stems, if you've pulled the stem off the plant, take your scissors and cut a clean cut so that water very easily goes up into the plant, keeps it fresh. The second is that you want clean stems. So if the bottom of the kale plant has some excess little tiny leaves on it, you don't want those in the water because that will start to break down in the water, and the water will start to hold more bacteria. So you want to pull those off so that you can just cook those up separately and have a clean stem in the water. The third is that you want clean water. So when I put these into these jars, I make sure I'm using clean water, and then every couple of days I just double check and make sure that the water's still clear. And if it becomes cloudy or looks strange, or if the plants aren't all the way down in the water, then I add more water. So that's one way to store your greens, is in these harvest bouquets. The other way to do it is to basically take those greens, if it's a really hot day, let's say it's 80 degrees outside, even in the morning it's hot, you may want to soak all of those greens in some water, and some cold water, and then take your bunches out and then put them in the fridge. And that is another way to store these stem greens. And of course, you can take your harvest bouquets and you can just put those right in the fridge as well. Okay, so storing root vegetables. So you can try these root bouquets, but they only last a couple days. And in order to do them, you want no soil on the roots. So here's what not to do. You can see in the image here, there's a little bit of soil on the roots, and no leaves in the water. If there's soil and leaves in the water, what happens is the bacteria from the soil and in that leaf, it will start to eat the root vegetable, and it looks really funny. It actually looks like little chew marks. So what you want to do is you basically want to refresh that water daily to remove that remaining soil. And like I said, it's only going to last a couple days like this. So I put them out on the table for my housemates this way because it's easier for me to share with my housemates, but you might want to store them in the fridge if you want maximum freshness. And the way that you do that, I would recommend cleaning them up, taking the top off and taking the little root piece off, and then putting them in a bowl, adding just a little bit of water, covering them, and putting them in the fridge. And you can put them in the crisper drawer, and that will keep them nice and cool. And sometimes if you don't eat them right away, they can start to lose their crispness. So you might want to add a little bit of water if they start to get mushy and soft a little bit, and that might perk them back up. Okay, storing sprouts. So this is a trick question. You don't really have to store your sprouts. You just keep growing them, and basically as you cut them is basically when you're eating them. So let's say I have a sandwich that I'm going to eat. I'm going to cut my sprouts and put them on the sandwich. And basically your sprouts are good from day 7 until about day 14. Beyond day 14, they start to get a little bit weird. They can be used, but they're a little bit strange. So if you find that you don't use all of them between day 7 and day 14, you can basically cut them all down and save them in the fridge. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a second. Okay, so storing soft greens, what you're going to do here is, these are things like arugula, spinach, lettuce, and then your microgreens and any sprouts that have gone beyond 14 days. So for soft greens, these are things, in the title it kind of says it, these are softer. They're not those hard leafy stem vegetables. They're a little bit more fragile. So what you want to do is when you cut your microgreens, you want to cut them so that there's no soil landing in the container, and then you can just simply put them right into a very cold spot like a fridge. I would recommend covering them, and I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. And then the same thing goes for those greens. If the greens get some soil on them, what I would recommend doing is washing them and then spinning them dry. And you want to spin them multiple times, get them as dry as possible before you put them in the fridge. Because what happens if you put them in the fridge wet is they start to rot, and you don't want that to happen. So what you can do is add a paper towel or just a regular towel, whichever one you have handy, and wrap the greens up in them and then put it in a container and put it into the fridge. And that will basically take any excess moisture and wick it away from your precious greens, and they'll stay nice and fresh. Okay, so that's what harvesting is all about. Remember, it's your job to remove all of the heat and replace it with cold water and or a cold space so that they can last as long as possible.